Tell me about where you were born.
I was born in Grande Prairie, Alberta. It's a northern Alberta town, a farming town, and it's near the BC border. So I was born in Grande Prairie, but I grew up more in Fort St. John and in Edmonton, Alberta. And I moved to Chilliwack in 1983.
Okay. So you have quite an education, don't you?
Well, I've spent a lot of years in school. I don't know if that means I'm educated. But I started out actually studying for the ministry. And it was in college studying for the ministry that I felt that I should devote my life to public service and more specifically politics. And so that's what I started out to do. But I also have a master's in public administration and a doctorate in history, which is on a public policy topic. I wanted to study why we put people in jail for long periods of time. So I looked at the history of the prison, and I went to Cambridge in the UK and studied the very first Penitentiary Act in 1779, where they first started to put people in jail for long periods of time as a punishment. And so that was just a fascinating thing. I published a book about that in 2008 that sold very poorly, by the way.
But that's because there was only about 200 copies.
Just a few copies made. It's an academic book. It's a dense book, and I never really expected it to be a bestseller. So.
All right. Well, what about your experience in the private sector?
Well, I've had some experience in the private sector. Of course, you know, when I was a student, I worked all kinds of jobs. I've worked on dairy farms, a couple of dairy farms. I've worked on the oil rigs up north of Fort Nelson, BC. I spent a winter with my brother working up there, which was a tough but very interesting time. And I've done other jobs like construction and things like that. But most of my career, I would say, has been in public service of some kind.
Okay, so just give us an overview of your public service experience.
Sure. I started to work in 1984 for Harvey Schrader, who was the social credit agriculture minister here in Chilliwack. I worked for him for 2 years, then went to work for Grace McCarthy in Victoria, and worked for the federal and provincial governments in a bureaucratic role as well in the early 90s, and started with Chuck Strahl in 1994 when he became a Reform MP. And I worked for him for 4 years. I worked for the leader of the official opposition, and that was Stock Day, Preston Manning, and Stephen Harper for about 5 years. And finally, when the government came in, I was ready, finished my PhD, to do the Chief of Staff job for Chuck Strahl. And so I worked actually in 4 federal departments. I worked in agriculture, I worked in Indian or Aboriginal Affairs, as it's now called, and in transport and in health. And I was a Director of Policy for the Minister of Health, Leona Gluka, for a while. And all of these things are very relevant to the Valley, so I think I've had some good political experience that would be relevant to the things that people in Chilliwack Hope are interested in.
All right. So the combination of this, it brings you here now. So specifically, what brought you to running for MLA for Chilliwack Hope?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't intend to do that at all. I didn't know that Barry Penner was going to resign. It came to me as a surprise, and I was studying at the time last semester in Trinity Western University, and I took some drawing courses. I decided to move back to my roots in the Valley late last summer, and I thought I would just take a year out and study some art at Trinity Western University, and so I was doing that. And when I heard that Barry Penner had resigned, I was encouraged to seek the nomination, and so I decided to try for it. And so far, I've been successful, and hope to be successful in the future if that's what the people of Chilliwack Hope would choose.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.